Hi everyone, my name is Jazz Cole. I am going to be talking today about what is linguistics and how does that affect us. Linguistics is something that I have considered studying and is a big part of what I do in terms of educating people on foreign languages, of course. And I really first want to start off with talking about what a linguist is not. A linguist is not, linguistics has nothing to do with studying languages specifically and how well you can speak them. It has nothing to do with that. It involves languages, but it involves it in the sense of the study of language in general. In looking at linguistics, a linguist is really looking at a few different branches of a language, really. That includes phonetics, which revolves around the sounds, like fundamental sounds that come from speaking, how we have different sounds that are related to different letters in that case, which leads into phonology, which is basically assigning sounds into specific letters. That's why the letter A is corresponding in the phonetic alphabet with the letter A, because that is the letter in writing that is associated with that sound that we make in our voices. Then there's morphology, and that is how words are structured. So especially if you're looking at words like if you're looking at the word run, you need to know that there are several different forms of that. There is run as a verb. You can use it as runner, as a noun. You can basically make that into ran, as in past tense. Just ways that words can morph into different structures, based like different grammatically. Then that moves into syntax, which is basically looking at how words are given meaning. So syntax is really when you structure sentences. It's basically like when you have different words. So with syntax is really looking at the association of words in association with their meaning. So for example, like with prefixes and suffixes, you can say someone is friendly versus someone is friendless, or friendliness, or if you wanted to say something like redo something versus just do something. The meaning can change based on how you structure or how you word them, or what is in front and what is behind a word, a root word in general. And then you have semantics, and that's basically context of like giving meaning to these words. And like I said, it changes basically like morphing, like with syntax is where you're adding or subtracting things that make those words become something or something else. There's also the components of pragmatics, and that's like language in context. That's like the difference between someone saying like, what do you want? Like when you're standing in line ordering something versus what do you want? Those types of contexts. So those are the different branches in which linguistics is composed of. But then looking at linguistics as as a subject that you study, like for example in a university, linguistics really composes of different areas of focus, such as psychology, philosophy, education, language teaching, sociology, anthropology. This is coming from the University of Arizona in regards to their program, of how they structure that particular program. So with all of these being the case is that there are different areas, because language is not just, we just throw a bunch of words together and we make sense about. You have to look at it as a whole into how these things come together. So you're looking at history, for example, with the Story of French, which is one of my favorite books in regards to language history, specifically with the French language. You're looking at origins. Where did it start? And then looking at how it's morphed into all of these different ways that we speak. People speak French from colonization, from how they're able to adapt that language to that culture. That's the reason why when you speak French in France, it's going to sound different than if you speak French in Quebec. It's very obvious. How they were able to influence and spread those languages, and how we even see certain words from other cultures that are inserting that into their version of that language. Dialects, how they spread apart from one content to the next in that sense. When you're looking at these things, there's psycholinguistics, which is actually a study of how people acquire languages from different ages. There are a lot of studies around this in terms of how children acquire language from the very beginning. In terms of, like, as you get older, there's a lot of research that explains how babies are learning versus when you get to a certain age, let's say in adulthood, why language learning is going to look different because of that age difference. And because of neurology, since babies have no language to go off of when they first start learning versus adults have a language to go off of if they learn, if they're learning a language. Versus, when you're looking at babies, they don't have a language to go off of, so they can only really refer to the language that they are being spoken to and imitating that. Adults, it's going to look different because adults typically do have a language that they can go off of when learning a second language. And then there's the aspect of applied linguistics, which is more so of language with real world application. Applied linguistics looks at language in more of like a worldly manner. Like that's, for example, in my applied linguistics course from the University of Leicester, there was a topic where we discussed when you use the word must, like you have to do something. There's literally, you're looking at different corpuses or like bodies of text that they gather specifically in spoken language versus written, like magazines versus movie and television, and then also looking at it in academic writing and seeing that fact that, like, when you say that you have to do something, typically there's a decline since like the 1990s from the use of must. No one really says I must go to work. Okay, not at least not that I've heard of. We usually say have to. Some people say I need to, like need to. Other people might say got to. And have to is pretty much the most common one that we looked at in the data that they showed us. So looking at how language is changing, where certain words, like they were saying with must, is actually not as in use as it used to be in the English language. And also even looking at demographics, how in certain, like specifically words that you use in British English is not going to be the same vocabulary, at least most of the time it's not going to be the same vocabulary as American English, because over time you get lazy. I mean, when you look at Shakespeare, we don't talk like Shakespeare anymore. We talk like we do now. We don't speak with thous and thee and all these little words that aren't really used anymore, and really looking at the evolution. And you also sociolinguistics, which is more about like different culture, such as like how languages branch off. So like, for example, if you're looking at, there's a really great video from Langfolk that talks about the languages of Italy, how obviously they speak Italian as a whole, but because of the different regions, you're going to see different dialects or sometimes even different languages. I remember looking at I think I was doing some research on Sicilian, their language specifically, and it looks completely different to what you would expect, considering that it is connected to Italy. Even in Italy, even today, there are still local languages that are branches of Italian. So, looking at that aspect of how they branch off and being able to place specific dialects. Even with the language of French, because French is pretty much spoken in 29 different countries as of now, released as an official or a secondary official language. You're looking at the fact that it is, because it's spread across different continents, it's going to look different, and how those languages are able to be categorized as well. Then you also have computational linguistics, which is really not so much as my thing, just because it really involves AI, like artificial intelligence, or any specific types of computer science. Because when you're looking at artificial intelligence, like for example with your smartphone, whether you have Siri, or in my case I have Google Assistant as a Samsung user, you have the aspect that Siri has to understand you, and having to program speech to text and actually creating these devices or creating these, like I said, artificial intelligence systems where people can actually understand what you're saying, for example, with commands, so that you're able to get Siri to answer your question the way you want. For Alexa, she has to understand you in whatever language you're speaking to it at, and being able to understand what you're saying to make those commands, if it makes sense. So the way I see it is that linguistics really affects our lives without you actually knowing it. Because again, like I said, we use artificial intelligence every day if you're a Siri user. I personally don't like voice assistants just because I'm old school. I like to text. Sometimes we use voice text, and that also is linguistics. It has to be programmed. That does affect our lives. Teaching, because the other thing is that for people to be able to teach you a language, especially like people who create the curriculum in schools as well as universities, or even like tutoring in my case, is that you have to be able to formulate in a way where people can understand and grasp the knowledge in small concepts, based on the way that in aspects of psycholinguistics in relation to how people learn. Even when you look at translation and interpretation, that does involve linguistics, even though it's the study of languages, not really, you actually learning those languages. It actually does affect, because they really and truly, people who actually go into studying linguistics typically do speak 2 or more languages. And linguistics kind of gives you an aspect of how languages can relate to one another. Another book that I really loved was Found in Translation. It's a very good book because it really shows you how translation and language really affects everyday lives from apps that you have. Like, for example, the app of, like Google Maps, for example, because no matter where you are in the world, you actually are going to use Google Maps in your native language. So everything has to make sure it's translated in a way where you can understand you understand what these countries are. That's why when I translate my phone, or when my phone is in French, it translates the United States on the map into les États-Unis. When I have it programmed, like my language setting in German, it's die Vereinigten Staaten. When I look at it in Italian, it's the Stati Uniti. It also does affect, in certain cases you can use it in like law, but overall you can use it in like several different aspects of different branches of your career. Okay. So with my personal experience with linguistics, I feel like it's actually something I'm considering getting in my master's in. And I think it's really impactful because when you learn about, especially with the program that I'm looking at that has specializations in language learning and multilingualism, is being able to understand how people learn languages, effectively being able to conduct my own studies, and also being able to figure out best ways that I can work with other people and experts to actually create the best ways that I can help other people learn those languages. I think it's very fascinating because linguistics has actually helped me be able to learn other languages. Even as a multilingual, one of the things I've noticed, and as a person who's very much theoretically thinking type of person, is I noticed that when I look at like things like, for example, Latin-based languages, because that's the majority of the languages that I speak, being able to look at French, and then also the fact that when I learned Spanish, it was so easy to pick up, and being able to analyze which words make sense, how certain words become masculine in one language and then they're feminine in another language. Especially even with German, since German is technically a Germanic language, hence the name, such as like English and Dutch and things like that up north, they actually have a neutral gender. So being able to make those connections, even with pronunciation, being able to make those connections, because certain sounds are going to be very much unique to certain languages. Just like in French and German, we use the sound, versus in Spanish, you'll see Spanish and Italian, you'll see like more of the r sound. In English, we don't really have those sounds for the most part. So being able to look at those phonetics as well. What I really will say is just overall is like learning the history of where languages come from is very helpful and over time, because I feel like, if you don't know where things come from, it actually can make it easier for you to example, even with like looking at like Latin, because I noticed that that is the basis for a lot of these languages. Yeah, being able to look at a lot of these languages and actually be able to take those and use those as reference for others' languages. Because like when you look at the word, like the fact that in the English language we use the word bougie, which actually comes from bourgeois, which was a word that was used to describe the middle class that was really consisting of merchants and people who basically created their own wealth versus depending on aristocracy to create their sense of status. So that kind of gives you a sense of, okay, now I understand why this word is being used this way in this context in the English language versus how it actually was originally introduced as a word to talk about the middle class. So learning the history and the etymology of this is actually really, and even the historical content, can actually make it easier for you to understand those changes. So language is really a really big part of our lives because that's how we communicate, that's how we share information. And even on a global scale, because we speak multiple languages, it's really great because it allows us, even with language learning, it allows us to be able to make those connections, especially with other people. And, at the same time, that's, and I will just say that's pretty much our goal, which is to keep us more connected to the world and the people that are in it, because language wouldn't be language without people. So that's what I really have for you. I hope this kind of gives you perspective on linguistics and what a linguist really does and how it affects our lives. We're kicking off the summer season with our Learn As You Go campaign. This summer, we're looking to raise $90,000 to help us accomplish our mission, which includes implementing effective teaching methods and instruction, develop and provide the best and most effective learning resources, and giving people opportunities to actively practice what they've learned and build global networks. If you'd like to learn more on how to support, make sure you check back in on our website or keep an eye on social media on June 20th for our official campaign kickoff. I'm so excited on how we'll be able to help you become more connected to the world and the people that are in it.